Shabbat Shalom. As we heard from our Bar Mitzvah, this week's Torah portion begins with the death of Sarah, but is much more focused on Abraham having a servant go and find a wife, find a partner for Isaac, for Abraham knows he's about to die, and the parsha ends and concludes with the death of Avraham Avinu, with Abraham's death, and yet that comes almost as a footnote in the story of the parsha. What stands out to me is not that Abraham dies, but it's that in the text that tells us about his death, he was laid to rest in Ma'arat HaMachpelah, in the cave that he bought to bury his wife Sarah, and we're told, Vayiparu oto Yitzchak v'Ishmael banav, that Isaac and Ishmael, his two sons, come together to bury their father. We last hear of Ishmael and Abraham's relationship in last week's parsha, 4 chapters earlier. Sarah is jealous of Ishmael and Hagar, and so she tells Abraham to cast them out of their home. And we find in the wilderness, Ishmael is crying as a Yeled becomes a Na'ar. And they go on to live a life as he grows up. Rabbinic tradition is actually so uncomfortable with the idea that Abraham would abandon Ishmael that Midrash suggests that he checked up on him throughout his life. In Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, we're told that Abraham would go and visit. Although he told Sarah that he would never go to their home, he never quite gets off the horse or the camel that he is riding at that time. But he keeps going to visit, keeps visiting with different wives of Ishmael to make sure that the idea of Haknasat Orchim, that the commandment to build a welcoming home, is being observed by Ishmael. And the relationship between Isaac and Abraham, we last hear about also in last week's parsha, 3 chapters earlier, as Abraham takes Isaac up on a mountain to sacrifice his son. Rabbi David Wolpe teaches that the hardest part of this process was not the walk up the mountain, or the binding of his hands or his legs, or the lifting up of a knife in order to sacrifice his son. But the hardest part was the walk down the mountain in silence. For there is never a word of dialogue spoken in the Torah again between Abraham and Isaac. Some rabbinic commentators suggest actually that their relationship was so frayed that is why Abraham sends his servants to go find a wife for Isaac. Because Isaac doesn't want to have anything to do with Abraham doing it. And yet, we find ourselves at the end of this parsha, Ishmael and Isaac coming together to bury their father. Torah is supposed to guide us in our lives, tell us how to live our lives, and we are inspired by this idea of reconciliation between the two, but we actually have no idea how to get there. We have no idea how they got there. There's nothing from the moment that Isaac and Ishmael were young children, brothers playing together, to this moment as older adults when they come together in their grief and mourning. And we don't know how to get there. We're supposed to be inspired by that idea of reconciliation between two brothers, two people. Remind us that at the end of the day, Isaac and Ishmael are brothers. And yet, Torah gives us no guide, no guidebook to ever return to that moment. Even if we yearn for that moment, even if we yearn for that idea, Torah doesn't tell us how to get there. And in this moment, as much as we yearn for that idea of getting there, it seems impossible. How do we get from where we are to that moment? I don't know. What I know, what we know, is that 5 weeks following terror, 5 weeks in the midst of war to return hostages, men, women, children, elderly, safely home. War to rid this world of the evil that is Hamas. We seem further away from that idea than we've ever been. Maybe that's because war is scary and unpleasant and a terrible reality of the world, and yet a reality that we need to deal with in order to eventually get to that place of peace. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that without the experiences of war, you do not understand the necessity of building a world of peace. And I don't know how to get to that place. Not until babies are brought home to their parents. Not until you no longer live side by side with neighbors who don't want you to exist in this world. But I pray, I believe, I hope, because that's all that we have is hope. That when war is over, that the Isaacs and Ishmaels of this world can come together in mourning and in grief to realize, to remember when they were children playing together. To realize that again, they are brothers. I don't know when that will be. It seems an eternity away. But I pray for safety, peace in Israel, for that moment to get here eventually.